going to do a hem with a seam tape and a hand stitch slip stitch hem. If you have a skirt that has any bit of flare to it, an A-line flare or any fullness at all, we're going to be turning up a little bit of a deeper hem. An inch or so would be nice. If you have a very flared skirt, maybe 3/4 or even 5/8 of an inch. But if you do have any flare, you do need to like break it into sections and stitch an ease stitch at 6.0. And you can do 1 or 2 rows depending on how much you have to ease in. And I would do it about 1/4 inch from the edge, an 1/8 inch from the edge. I'm just going to do one for you here. And this doesn't have to be exact because it's not going to be seen. You're just going to use this as a help to get it back to the right shape to hem it. Okay, and you do not want to tie off, and you need to leave yourself tails so you can adjust the gathers. So if this one is a straight skirt, but if this was a flared skirt, let me get you a sample. If this was a flared skirt like this one, when you turn it back up, it's going to not meet up at the seam allowances. So you need to pull the threads and get it aligned so that it eases back in a little bit like the sleeve, although it's very minimal. But you do want to ease it back in, and then when you have this eased, when you pull the thread and it's eased properly, then press this, and try not to press creases in it, but press this nice fold at the depth that you want to stitch it up at. So I have folded up the hem depth that I wanted. I had measured and pressed, so I'm ready to go with this edge. Now I need to apply the seam binding. So I have seam binding available in the classroom. Comes on a big roll. I have standard neutral colors. I have white, cream, light gray, dark gray, black, and a taupe. If you would prefer a different color, you may purchase what you like, but these are the colors that I have available. And so what we're going to do is apply this seam binding over the raw edge. Usually when we have a skirt, the fabric is a bit heavier, and we may not want to fold it over twice. It might be too bulky of a finish, or if you have a nicer wool fabric or some other kind of, I know some of you have like a brocade, you may not want to fold it over twice. It's too bulky. So if we apply the seam tape over the raw edge, we'll enclose all the raw edges and still have a nice finish. So when we start this, I usually start like in the center back. I'm going to start from the top side and just make sure that I am covering the raw edge. And I'm going to use a regular stitch, a 2.5 rather than that basting stitch, 2.5 or 3.0. And I'm going to go around and stitch this on. Now, if you had some, if you have a flare skirt and you have some gathers, this is where you would put the seam binding over this gathering and keep that shape. So the seam binding is going to keep it the shape. This particular skirt is a pencil skirt, so it's straight down. But you do want to stitch this seam binding on, and then when it comes around the other side, I'm going to stitch all the way around. You want to fold, leave yourself enough so that you can fold this edge and apply it over the beginning. So I'm just going to, I'm not going to go all the way around for you here, but I'm going to pull this over and just stitch a little bit so you can see. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'll pin this down here. And so there's no raw edges of even the seam binding. Okay, and then I can just stitch that down on the edge, making sure that I catch the hem in there. And of course, if I was stitching in the round, I wouldn't have to tie off at the beginning because I'm going to come around and fold that edge over. But I'm just doing it all in one so that you don't have to watch me go all the way around here. Oops, sorry. I could have pinned this all down all the way around. Now you're ready to slip stitch your hem. You've got it pressed up, you have the seam tape on. If you needed to gather or ease it on so that it meets up exactly, you want to meet your seam allowances here, your seams in all areas. Pin it back up, and then usually I would start in a place where it has seam allowance so that I can slide. The needle I have a single thread again, knotted on the end. So you could use a little longer than this, but we want to use a single thread because we're only going to catch one thread, and it's easier, or it shows less with one thread. So I'm going to slide my needle underneath the seam allowance, and I'm going to catch it here, and I'm going to take a stitch right in the seam allowance. And here I don't have to be quite as careful because I can catch it in the seam allowance and it will not show on the outside. So when I'm going to take a stitch, it's same as slip stitching the waistband, about 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch apart, and I'm going to catch just 1 or 2 threads. This is a very thick thread, so I can just catch one, and I'm going to slide it into the seam tape. And then I'm going to do that the same thing. Sometimes if you have a very fine threads, you need to catch more than one. And I'm not pulling it too tight because I don't want to leave a ridge here. And so I'm going to leave a little bit of play in my stitches so that I don't have a ridge pulling from the outside that shows on the outside. And then here too, depending on your fabric, you might be able to take more than one stitch at a time. Here I can try and catch more than one. If you have a really pliable fabric, I'm going to try for 3 here, see what happens. And I'm still going to have a light touch when I pull the thread so that it's not pulling it up. And make sure that this is flat and flush so that you're not pulling it up and causing a wrinkle or that it's dropping too low. But you want to keep it soft here. So you continue that way, and then when you get done, you'll probably end up at the seam here where you started, and so then you can sink your stitches underneath into just the seam allowance again so that you can do some tie-offs here and you won't have much showing on the outside. So I'm just going to finish this off here on the seam tape, which would not be as desirable, but I don't want to leave this edge unfinished. So I'm going to do, remember, make a loop, put the needle back through it again, and here I'm doing the 3rd one. That should be secure, and then I can thread the needle back underneath, making sure it doesn't show on the outside, and tie it off, or cut it off, I mean. And then if I was using a white thread instead of a bright blue, you wouldn't be able to see these stitches on the outside. And even if you saw the little pinprick, you shouldn't be able to see any dimples of where the stitches are too tight. And now your skirt's all finished.